Shabbat Sholom. I do not know how many of you guys have been to Japan, but this is a trip worth making, I think. Japan is really one of the most advanced countries in the world in so many different things. I actually love being in Japan. I've been a couple of times. And regardless of what you've heard, I go not only to eat sushi, I also go to learn a little bit from the culture. It's really enjoyable. But one of the most memorable things that I ever did in Japan was visit Hiroshima, the site of one of the nuclear bombings by the United States on Japan at the end of the Second World War. And it's a beautiful city, beautiful. It's been rebuilt, and you could not tell that there was once an atomic explosion there, except for a bank next to the park where you can still see what the bomb did to the building. And it basically melted it. The first time we went to Hiroshima, the museum of the bombing was actually in a 2 or 3 room structure. The second time we made it there, they had turned the entire 3-room structure into a gigantic museum in the middle of a beautiful park. And the one thing that didn't change about the museum, which is really, when you know museums, this is one of the ones you have to visit in your life. The one thing that did not change is the lack of a mention of why Hiroshima was bombed. You literally walk in there, and you would think that the Japanese were minding their own business, like peaceful, happy people, and one day, out of the blue, for no reason whatsoever, the evil United States just dropped a bomb on them. There is no mention of the war, literally. There is no mention of the torture to prisoners of war. There is no mention of the torture to their own citizens. There is no mention of Pearl Harbor. There is no mention of anything. Needless to say, that the United States joined the war because of Japan. So it's one of the most incomprehensible things you can actually see when you know history. The problem is that history gets to be written by those who experienced it. And sometimes their account of history is not the same as ours, not because they don't know history, they just cannot bring themselves to admit what really happened. And by the way, this is one of the most dangerous things that we can do as human beings. Stop understanding why things happen and why history unravels itself the way it does. This past Friday morning, I had a little FaceTime conversation with my sister-in-law, Tali, in Mexico City. She's a historian, and she mostly deals with Mexican history. Once in a while, she delves into the world of Jewish history. And she called me to ask me a couple of questions about the Talmud and censored parts of the Talmud. And we were talking, and I asked her, how you doing? And of course, this is the question that when you ask another Jewish person anywhere in the world these days, they say, well, everything's horrible, right? The world is upside down, the situation is the worst we've ever seen. And I said, yeah, it is. And we started sharing anecdotes of misery with one another, right? And then I answered basically her questions, and I said to her, I'm working on my high holiday sermons, and I'm trying so hard to prevent myself from going down into that bottom where you can only think of tragedy and despair in the last 700 days. And we hung up, but I started thinking, about history and about this Torah portion. Because the last Aliyah that we read this morning, and the Maftir that Ethan read, Zachor, it's actually the name of one of the special Shabbatot before Pesach. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you. It's an incredible commandment. But the second part of the commandment is even worse. erase the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Lo tishkach. Don't forget. So, in the same almost sentence, we're given a commandment that actually is a juxtaposition in itself. Remember and erase. So what are we to remember? What are we to erase? It's actually a tremendous question if you think about it. The first time I met Elie Wiesel, I was 19 years old. I met him in person. My old senior rabbi in Mexico City, Marcelo Rittner, who's my mentor, actually brought him to speak in Mexico City at the synagogue. And Marcelo is still a master of understanding who to bring to speak at the synagogue so the community can enrich itself from the ideas that are circulating in the Jewish world. And when you live not in North America, but in Mexico, right? You actually have to make things contemporary. Because south of the border, we tend to shield ourselves and live in a cocoon. So when he brought Elie Wiesel, it was a tremendous moment. And I found myself alone with Elie Wiesel in my rabbi's office. And he signed the book for me. And he asked me my name, and I said, my name's Felipe. He says, no. Your real name, what is your Hebrew name? So I said, Pinchas. So he signed his name in the book, to Pinchas with love. May you always follow your dreams. And then he said to me, and never forget who you are, which is exactly what Ron said to Ethan today. This is something we repeat generation after generation to our children. Don't forget who you are. There's an article in the foreword this past week about a new documentary about Elie Wiesel. And this documentary is centered on the ideas behind his life and how he actually became to be a voice of Holocaust survivors. Because at the beginning, he literally was locked in a room in Paris talking to no one. And one of the quotes that appear in this article in the foreword, I've never heard before by Elie Wiesel, which says, our enemy's greatest fear is our memory. Think about that for a second. What our enemies fear most about us as Jews is not our might or our power or, our physique. God knows that's not there. What our enemies fear the most is our memory. We never forget who we are. We never forget where we were. And the most important thing, we always remember history the way it happened. 700 days after October 7th, we now understand that the important battles of that war in trying to bring our brothers back, in trying to defeat this modern version of Amalek, which is Hamas, is not necessarily in the battlefield, but it's in pleading with the world to remember history the way it really happened. Our memory. The world doesn't like to remember. That's why I spoke with you about Hiroshima. Nobody likes the real version of events. Everything is embellished or distorted. In the old days, it was not so easy. But today, with social media and the internet and artificial intelligence, which, by the way, out of every 4 questions, 2 are wrong when it answers, you have to really watch out for the right version of history. American history, European history, it's all filled with allegories of things that actually never happened. And so our modern day battle with Amalek, an Amalek that on October 7th raped and burned and tortured and murdered and pillaged, and now portrays itself as the victim, is really what this Torah portion is talking about. The commandment to destroy Amalek is very problematic. Because also we as Jews, we do not like violence. I mean, when have you ever seen in any city in the world people saying, oh, here come 3 Jews, let's walk to the other side of the road? We don't like to engage in violence. We don't like fights. We keep to ourselves. So when we get a commandment in the Torah that says you have to destroy them, we have a hard time. The Rambam, Maimonides, in Ilchot Melachim, actually says the only way to fulfill that commandment is to first offer peace. If you offer peace and they don't take it, then you destroy Amalek. And that's the historical reality in which we find ourselves today. We've offered peace more than once. Literally, all of us say the same thing. You want this to end? Free the hostages. It'll end in 10 minutes. I know it's not so simple, but it could be that simple. Yet, it doesn't happen. The problem with this mitzvah is that it becomes not only about defeating Amalek, but about we ourselves not becoming Amalek. And I know that sounds like a cliche, but it's easier said than done. When you are involved in something as difficult as what we're seeing today, you're pulled to the bottom sometimes. You know, Primo Levi, he wrote about one of the other survivors that he shared the space with in the concentration camp, a man by the name of Steinloff, who was older than he was. And Steinloff was famous because he used to tell the other inmates, let's polish our shoes. Let's wash our faces. Let's not lose our humanity. Let's not sink to where they want us to sink, because if we do that, we lose. And I know that every time the world says, where is the aid? We all say, there is the aid, and how can people that murder and burn and rape and pillage deserve aid? Again, look, my father-in-law is the nicest person I've ever met. Really, literally. But he tells me every time we talk about this, turn off the water. You'll see they'll give us the hostages in 5 days. But we can't do that. I wish we could, but we can't. Not only because we're not going to sink to who they are, but also because our tradition forbids us to do that. And that's what we struggle with as Jews every day. Look, when the President of the United States ordered the bomb to be dropped in Hiroshima, they chose Hiroshima and Nagasaki for 2 reasons: strategic value and the number of population. They wanted to make sure that at least they didn't target more people than was necessary to end the war. They could have bombed Tokyo. What prevented the United States from bombing Tokyo? But they didn't do it because they had to limit the damage somewhat. And that idea of not sinking to the lowest point, just like your enemies, actually was present in the thoughts of the leaders of this country. It could have been much more of a disaster. And by the way, let's not forget, that ended the war. God knows how many more years the Japanese would have kept on fighting. And more people would have died. That's the dilemma of wiping out Amalek. That's what we struggle with. It's not easy, but it has to be done in every generation. There's a philosopher, David Livingstone, who wrote about this theory of the race to the bottom, where he speaks about soldiers in battle that actually become convinced that the only way to fight evil is with evil. The IDF actually indoctrinates its soldiers in understanding that you cannot fight evil with evil. They go through an entire course about this. And yes, things happen in war that we cannot control. But when we say that we have the most ethical army in the world, we actually mean it. It's not empty words. Yesterday, a skyscraper was brought down in Gaza City. There were cameras, TV cameras from the Palestinians, waiting for the building to be bombed. How can that be? Well, because they knew, because Israel warned them. If there was no warning, there would have been no cameras. That's what we do. We completely eliminate the element of surprise in order to save lives. Now, let's just understand something. There's another commandment in the Torah, in the book of Leviticus, in Vayikra. Lo tishaketz et nafshoteichem. Do not turn your souls into an abomination. What does that mean? The Hasidic masters actually took this pasuk and they said, that means that Amalek lives within us. That what we're trying to erase is not Amalek physically, but Amalek within us. That we do not turn into them. That's why that pasuk exists. We fight evil, we blot out Amalek, but we don't erase ourselves in the process. That's super important. Viktor Frankl, another Holocaust survivor, actually once wrote, when we are not able to change the situation, we are charged to change ourselves and to rise up to the occasion and not to sink to the bottom. I'm going to leave you with one thought that I think is very, very important to remember. The same aliyah that we read at the end, Zachor and Timchok, remember and erase, back to back, completely opposite. We are a people of contradictions. But because we solve these contradictions and we struggle, we were given the name Israel, which means struggle. And may we always struggle. Because dropping bombs and defending ourselves and hurting others should not be something that comes natural. If you ask any Israeli parent, they will tell you that the thing that they resent the most is that their children have to go and kill somebody else's children and have to learn to carry a weapon doing athletics or playing soccer or baseball or football. This is what we resent the most, that they make us do this. Please, let's not let Amalek erase ourselves and forget who we are. Shabbat Shalom u'mevorach. May I please ask us to rise, page 184, the Chatzi Kaddish for Musaf.